Again, thanks everybody for being with us tonight. My name is Josh Clark. I'm the head of School of Landmark School, and you are joining us for a part of our Landmark Learn series, where tonight we're looking at navigating dyslexia as an adult in the workplace. And so again, so glad to have you here. We have a lot of really exciting conversation to share with you. I want to begin by first introducing our guests and thanking them so much for taking the time to be with us. First, Gabby Leone. I did it right, Gabby, right?
Yep.
Leone, been practicing the last couple of minutes. Gabby's actually a graduate of Landmark School. So she is a product of Landmark. Like I bet many of us on the call right now, either graduates of or maybe parents of current students. So Gabby graduated from Landmark and has now spent the last 12 years as an employee of John Hancock, now Manulife, and she currently is working in global events and strategic initiatives. So after Landmark, Gabby went on to higher education and has been, again, in this particular career for about 12 years. And she'll tell us more about that in just a bit, about what she does, what that journey has looked like, and all those things. We also have Judy Reilly. Judy is the director of the Center for Neurodiversity and Employment Innovation at the University of Connecticut. And I'm just so excited for y'all to learn more about Judy and her work. And what's super exciting, I think just so cool, and again, Judy will talk more about this in a moment, but the center's only been around for a couple of years. And so talk about kind of cutting edge. It's just really kind of a unique and a kind of extraordinary time, I think, when we think about employment, when we think about work, and we think about individuals who learn differently. In just a moment, I'm going to try to sell you on a thesis I have about how it's actually a great time to be dyslexic in terms of the workforce. So before that, a couple of quick housekeeping things. So everyone that registered for tonight's conversation will get a copy emailed to them, a link along with some resources that we will discuss throughout the evening. If you have any questions at any point, you're welcome to use the Q&A. Just put those questions in there. If it's something that makes sense or that we're able to see in the moment, we'll kind of pause and answer it. If not, we'll try to leave a few minutes at the end to make sure that we get to questions. So, all right, before we jump into our conversation, I turn things over to Gabby and Judy to talk a little bit about themselves and their perspective and all their experiences. I'm gonna attempt to share my screen, and I apologize. I'm actually having a difficult time. In the background, we have our director of communications, Susan Thomas. Susan, if you don't mind, if you would enable me to share my screen, that would be great. In the interim, um, I'll talk about my thesis for a second while I wait for that to happen. So, very quickly, what I want to talk about or want to introduce is this idea of not just what does it mean to be dyslexic at work, but let's broaden this conversation for a second, because I think, living in a very interesting time where we need to think about the future of work, right? Work as we know it is changing. That has implications that are specific to individuals with dyslexia and related learning differences, but it's also kind of a universal change that we're seeing that we all kind of have to navigate, that we all kind of have to explore together. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen right now so I can share this with you. And look at that, the future of work. Perfect segue. If you bear with me for 2 seconds while I get myself situated so I can better see. And I'm going to pop this out so I can go full screen for a second. And good. All right. Gabby, you can see my screen, right? You can see the
I
future.
can.
Okay. All right. So, like I was saying, it's a really interesting, kind of exciting, intriguing time to even think about what it means to be a productive and successful contributor in the workforce right now. So, I want to kind of walk you through a couple of things. First, many of you might be familiar with the World Economic Forum that comes out with this Future of Jobs report. So this came out in May of 2023. So not even a year old. And again, this is not specific to LD individuals, but again, I'm gonna make a case, hopefully in a moment, that suggests that it does have some exciting and some pretty consequential things for us to think about. So again, World Economic Forum, forecasting. What is work going to look like? What's this going to be? What are we trying to do? And I'm going to pause this for 2 seconds. So one of the things that they come up with is this idea of the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm actually, for the sake of time, I'm not going to show you this video, but I'll talk about it for a moment. And what they're talking about is this intersection of technology, of lifestyle, technology being artificial intelligence, but technology also being biotechnology and other things that are all kind of coming together at once. And we're really starting to see a kind of a change, a very broad change in how we solve problems and the kinds of problems that are coming before us to even for us to even solve, right? And they capture this again, this idea of a fourth industrial revolution, right? The next phase of how we think and operate in the world. So when they and exploring that, you can see here that they kind of profile what they are seeing as the top fastest growing jobs and the jobs in the fastest decline. Some of these are not surprising, though I still find them fascinating, right? So AI and machine learning specialists, the #1 fastest growing job. And I would argue 12 months ago, we might have known what AI was, but I don't think we would see it or talk about it in the same context as we even do today, right? So these things are happening very rapidly. But what I find interesting is if you look at those fastest growing jobs, those are all things that I would classify as thinking jobs. Those are all jobs where you take information, you think about it, and then you produce something new. Whereas on the right-hand side, those are all jobs where it was more you know and you do. You have a finite and defined amount of information. You take that information and then you act upon it in ways that were fairly predictable and consistent. And that's the contrast that I think is fascinating here, right? When we think about job analysts and engineers, right, these are all jobs that are about taking new information and or existing information and trying to find new connections, new ideas, do new things with it. Whereas again, on the right-hand side, those are things that are, again, assumed you had a certain level of knowledge that you can then apply over and over again. I also just think it's hysterical that the 8th fastest declining job is legislators. I think that should move to #1 at this point. Um, uh, but what's also really cool, or I think fascinating, is that they're also predicting that with this onset of technology and this growth in artificial intelligence, that a portion of work that is completed by machines is actually growing, and it's actually growing pretty rapidly, right? So in 2022, about 34% of tasks are completed by machines and 66% by humans. But only 5 years from then, and now, 3 years from today, it's anticipated that we're going to go from 34% to 43%. So almost a 10% increase in just a 5-year period in the amount of tasks that we assume machines are going to do. And if you think of that trajectory, so if you have a second grader right now, imagine on that trajectory what life and the workforce might look like for them. For all of us in our careers right now, right? If unless we are at near retirement age, we are also all going to ride that acceleration. What does that look like? What does that mean? And what we're also starting to see is that with AI, there's more and more predictions that the work that we do right now, a significant portion of it will be assumed by artificial intelligences and kind of similar technologies. A couple things that I find interesting about this graph is actually from McKinsey. So this is not the World Economic Forum. This is McKinsey Consulting. But for me, what I find fascinating, if you look at this, right, one of the fields that they anticipate having one of the biggest shifts in automation is education, right? And then you could see all the STEM, health professionals, and up and down. But again, and I'm sure you've talked and heard this throughout kind of the media recently, but these are no longer blue collar jobs that we think of being impacted and affected by automation. These are more traditional white collar jobs. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And then on the right there, it talks about this. I won't go into great detail, but in the last 6 months, there's been a study out of Harvard that looked at Boston Consulting, which is another huge consulting group, where they did a study around AI and the use of AI in this consulting group. And it found that there were some pretty meaningful productivity gains for those individuals that were using AI versus those that weren't. Even more fascinating is it was the lowest performers found the highest gains by using AI in the workforce. So really interesting stuff, right? So what does this look like, right? If this shift is predicted to happen, what does this look like? What might this mean? And the World Economic Forum is, as an example, is predicting that 44% of workers' core skills are expected to change, not in the next 50 years, not in the next 30 years, in the next 5 years, right? We used to talk a lot about how our kids would all have jobs that don't yet exist. And that's come to fruition right now. We have folks that are doing social media and all these other works in technology that, again, didn't exist 20 years ago. But now I think we're finding that our kids are going to perform jobs that exist today, but they're going to perform them fundamentally differently than we do right now. And we, as workers in the workforce now, right, this is going to be something that we have to grapple with. As technology comes, skills are going to change, and the expectations of how we adapt are going to change. As an example of this, I find this fascinating. The top two in-demand skills for crane operators. So if you want to be a crane operator right now, top two in-demand skills are prompt engineering and drone piloting. That's nuts, right? That's nuts. But those are the things, because of it, as technology changed, unmanned cranes are safer. They're less prone to accidents. And then there's sensors all over cranes now, and so through AI and kind of this prompt engineering, we can do really good pre-maintenance on these really complex machines, right? Well before that there's problems, right? But it's crazy. I have a woman I've had the great pleasure of getting to know, Laura Powell, and she's the head of human resources for HSBC, which is a huge global bank, right? She's head of all of HR. She recently put on this LinkedIn update, which I thought was fascinating. And she's talking about one of the largest banks in the world. She says, we're hiring for skills. With hiring for skills being 5 times more predictive of job performance than hiring for education, and more than 2 times more predictive than hiring for experience, it's exciting to see this new strategy that we're taking. And what they're looking at are transferable skills, not degrees, not a particular knowledge set, and not necessarily industry experience, but do you have skills that would transfer over to the problems that we're trying to solve, the services that we're trying to offer? Um, and what those skills look like, what this is looking to shape into is, again, this is the World Economic Forum. These are the top 10 skills in demand in the workforce: analytical thinking, creative thinking, resiliency, flexibility, self-awareness, curiosity, empathy. And for those of you that are raising a dyslexic child right now, or maybe dyslexic yourself, I hope some of this resonates, right? Because these are also the skills that we often associate with individuals with dyslexia. So the very skills that the World Economic Forum is predicting will be the most important in the future workforce, and future really beginning now, are also the skills that are often self-identified by dyslexic people as strengths, right? Those soft skills that may not show or be as prominent when tested or observed through traditional academic measures. Those are also the skills that are suddenly becoming more and more important. And I think what we're starting to see, and I'm fascinated to get Gabby and Judy's takes on this, but I think what we're starting to see is that what you know does no longer has the importance of what you can learn to do, and what the resilience you have to kind of change and to grow within a career, not in preparation for a career. And so finally, this is my thesis come to fruition. If again, going back to that idea of this fourth industrial revolution, if you think about kind of the history of mankind, we went through this agricultural age. We were hunter-gatherers, and then we went this agricultural age, right? Where communal living became important. There was a certain skill set associated with that. And then we went into this industrial age, and there was a certain skill set associated with that. Most recently, we've been living in a knowledge age, right? Where what you knew was so important because you were going to enter a career where it was expected that you would take that knowledge and predictably apply it again and again and again to a problem set that repeated itself. but I would argue we're entering a dyslexic age, which is really the learning age. Now we're entering an age of work and of expectations where what we can do, the way that we shape things, and the ability to kind of, again, that resiliency and that creative out of the box thinking is going to become more and more important. So with that, thank you everyone, especially Judy and Gabby, for my indulgence there. Um, so what I'd love to do is as we begin this conversation, I would love to take a few moments again and just get to know both of you a little bit more, your background, what brings you to this conversation. And Gabby, let's start with you.
Sure. So I was one of the lucky ones who started at Landmark when I was summer going into fifth grade. So I went to Landmark for 8 years. Like I said, absolutely feel like the luckiest person to be able to say that. And I know most of the people who have attended Landmark hopefully feel the same way now. After Landmark, I went to Stonehill College. I got my bachelor's and started my career. I went straight into more of like the insurance industry to start, actually, and then ended up at John Hancock, now Manulife, because I'm the global in part of it. John Hancock still exists in the United States as we do business, but globally we're Manulife. And I moved around throughout the company. So I majored in international business. I like I said, I had a few insurance jobs. So I was in reinsurance, life insurance, and then I started at John Hancock in long-term care insurance. I then went into personal financial services where I was there for 5 years selling mutual funds, but couldn't actually obtain my license, the Series 7 and 63. So that was a struggle. And then ended up kind of pivoting to the global wealth and asset management side of the business, and now find myself in event planning after a strategic analyst role. And I actually dabbled in communications, but being a dyslexic, that probably wasn't the best fit. And then events was really my calling. I don't know how it took me so long to get here, because I feel like I do a lot of those things you touched on, Josh. Like imagining creativity. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, why couldn't I have touched on that earlier? And the relationship building, most of the people who know me know that I love to build relationships. So that's kind of my journey to where I am now, and I'm sure I'll elaborate on that more.
That's so great. And one of the things, and we'll come back to it too, but I feel like you were like the poster child for this like thesis of it's not about attaining a career, it's about navigating and learning and evolving in a career,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so and we'll come back to that because I'd love to hear more about how you think, if you think that kind of prior experiences maybe through school prepared you for that,
Okay.
in ways that if it was easy at school it may not have.
Yeah.
But Judy, tell us more about yourself and the center and the work that y'all are doing.
I would love to, and thank you so much. But I first have to say to Gabby that I want, for the parents on the call especially, I want to hear about that, how you got that first job, like
Mm.
insurance of all things, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's going to be a
Absolutely.
really, everyone's like, what? Like, how, first of all, how would I convince my kid to do that? And second of all, like, how do you get that, international business into insurance? We'll get back to that. But hi, everybody. I'm Judy Reilly. I'm with the University of Connecticut, and I'm the director of our Center for Neurodiversity and Employment Innovation. And what that is a national academic center. There are only 2 in the country right now who are focusing on the challenges around neurodiversity and employment. So our primary focus, the other one that we're a sister center with, is Vanderbilt, the Frist Center, and they're really focused on autism more than neurodiversity, but they're working on sort of technologies and engineering to make the workplace more accessible, and candidate readiness. But we really work on, and I'm so interested to hear Gabby's sort of feedback on this, but we work on educating employers. What are learning differences? How do they show up? Why do they not matter to the skills of the job, right? So these traditional metrics of both the hiring process, but then once you're employed, what kind of supports are needed so that you're like mitigating some of the challenges, just like we all know, like how do we create the landmark employers out there? So we teach a lot of companies about really what is neurodiversity and why it should be part of, those the skills that you talked about, Josh. Like they don't know, people are just who don't live this life don't really understand that sort of flip side of, so we move from it being kind of this misfit in the educational system, unless you're fortunate enough like Gabby to be landing somewhere like Landmark, into like, there's a strengths-based aspect to this that employers are starting to understand, that this is an underserved, under maybe employed talent pool. And so I'm really excited to share that sort of hopeful piece where companies are they're kind of going nuts about this, learning about neurodiversity and learning differences. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you both for being here. And I think, and again, we'll circle back to so many things, but I think just that point, Judy, that it's not just about, hey, we're, corporate ABC and we want to do the right thing. There's also an appreciation and recognition. This is a opportunity to capitalize on an undervalued resource.
Yep.
And again, I think for many of us who had such a hard time in school and had a difficult path, to think of ourselves as, an asset that is just affirming narrative.
Yeah, it's really fun to flip that script for people. And I have so many students who come to us. So we have a candidate network that spans 80 different universities and colleges across the country. But so we'll have candidates from anywhere, and they're like, no, I'm not telling. And we work them through this understanding, and they're like, but it's never been an asset. This has never been a strength. And really just empowering and educating candidates to understand their own profile of strengths, like you said, communication and imagination and creativity and problem solving. And it's just, it's delightful on the candidate side, and it's really delightful to educate employers about this. It's a value proposition. This is not charity, right? This is not philanthropy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. And as you say that, like, idea of it's a strength, how do you talk to an employer about this? Gabby, I know, you and I have talked about kind of through your different journeys, right? And you even just shared a moment ago, as part of this, I wanted to do X, but there was a series of kind of credentialing assessments that I had to pass, that I couldn't for, I would imagine obvious reasons. But will you talk a little bit about kind of your experience as I'm dyslexic, I'm at work, and opportunities you've had where I want to share that so people understand that might have actually been to your benefit in some cases, but that opportunity, the other times when you might have been like, you know what, none of your business,
Yeah, I think I definitely pick and choose who I tell, but I will say, I mean, from the beginning, being a student advocate at Landmark to going to Stonehill and like researching what disability awareness group I could be part of, and then now being part of an employee resource group within the company. I kind of do like telling my story still, but I always, even though it's anyone can join, it is definitely a more safe space that I always like to share it. Or otherwise, it's with a direct manager. And I feel like I've been very lucky with most of the managers I've had. I think most recently, I don't know if my disability really comes out as much. I don't know, but I haven't, when I came back from maternity leave, it was kind of like an awkward transition. I feel like where I was trying to get to know my new manager. So it kind of hasn't really been brought up. And then, I'll mention Landmark, and a few of them are from the North Shore, and they're like, oh, wow, that's a great school. And then I'll tell them the story, yeah, I have a language, but so it kind of like naturally will happen. But I think it's something it's part of me. So I don't really shy away from it, but it's kind of one of those things that naturally happen as well.
And is it fair to say too, as you go through that, you haven't had in sharing that, no one's ever been like, well, how do you work here? Or,
No. I mean, I think people are like, so you like, they just want to know more because they don't understand it. They're like, so you read backwards? I'm like, no, actually, dyslexia, I was reading backwards, so I'll tell them, kind of my journey if it's the appropriate time. But yeah, generally speaking, I will say it was more comprehension when I was younger. And, I, had an 8th grade reading level when I started, like when I was able to be there for years type of thing. I don't know. It's just interesting how people just need to be educated more. And that's really what it comes down to, is having more of those honest conversations and telling your story. Because I think that's when it really hits home the most. I mean, even as like I think about college, there was one professor who was just I mean, he was like out the door about to retire, but he just did not, it was a business law class. He did not understand what I said when I said all I said was like, I need a little extra time. And everyone had to give a huge presentation throughout the semester, and he would grill everyone at the end. They would give their presentation, they would tell you, he would just grill you on questions. And when I went up, he didn't ask one, I think he asked like one simple question, and then he was like, okay, thank you, Gabriella. I was like he just kind of let me off easy. So it's not, it's more the education part. So
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't understand what it meant, right?
no, exactly.
I'll
So
just lower the bar, or I'll just like get this passed, right?
exactly, which I was happy with, but
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll take that too.
Hey, Josh, can I just jump in and ask Gabby a question about like, so you were talking about lucky, like I'm lucky I've had these managers who are just really, and what we do sort of through UConn is, we take kind of luck out of it. And you just mentioned
okay.
the word here is that it's education.
Yeah,
And they're just, we have curriculum for managers, we have curriculum for HR professionals, we have curriculum for sort of ERGs and areas. You say
yeah,
you're like part of a
yeah,
business resource group. Because infusing people with the information to destigmatize and like take the intimidation out of what is this learning? We all live this life. Like we get it,
exactly.
but
Right,
people who are not living it don't know. And educating a corporate community is been really well received, and people, when they know better, they do better. So I just
exactly.
I just think that was really interesting. You said lucky, and I don't want it to be
No,
about
that's true.
luck.
No, you're
You're not
right.
education. Yeah.
I
Sorry,
will say
Josh, I take that.
we did a huge campaign like 3 years ago called the Signature Series, because John Hancock's signature. And this year we're doing a global event. It's a global colleague event. So we're doing it in North America and Asia. And it's actually at the end of the month. And it's called Share Your Better Story. It's the Better campaign. And it's really based on that, like people individually sharing their journey in life and how they've gotten in the workplace and how it's made them a better employee or whatever we actually have a couple customers as well speaking, but it's mostly employees. So it's kind of like targeting, like you said, education through experience.
And kind of on that idea, especially, I really like that point of like, shouldn't have to be lucky. And we talk about that in the K through 12 sector a lot. Like, you shouldn't be lucky that you have a teacher that knows this, right? This shouldn't be, but in your work, when you go to corporations, what are kind of the number one lessons that you try to impart to these, managers and these larger corporations that seem to be a misconception or just a complete lack of understanding?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It is about misinterpreting two things: behavioral differences and resume differences. So when we look at sort of entry-level career, and you're going to have some resumes that maybe you don't have the college degree, that does not, these credentials and these performance metrics, we educate them about why that might not have happened because of barriers to educational attainment. As we all know, if you're not at Landmark, you may not attain commensurate with your aptitude, commensurate with your actual abilities. So we talk about resume gaps. Why were there no internships, right? I don't know. I'm trying to keep my head above water and graduate college. And I didn't even, how am I going to get an internship when these companies don't even understand my neurodiversity or my dyslexia or my ADHD? So we talk about that, and we really educate them to say, whatever you're screening on, probably wrong. You're probably leaving all sorts of talent on the editing room floor. And then behavioral differences, we really talk about how hiring practices can change to be more, I think maybe you were talking about this when we were when you were over talking about the World Economic Forum, skills, skills to do the job rather than the traditional metrics of an interview. Now,
Yeah,
Gabby, and dyslexia, like you're generally going to be, oh God, I hate to paint with a broad brush, but like we work with all kinds of neurodivergence. So if you're somebody who's maybe autistic, that's going to be one thing. Dyslexia, you're probably going to come out, you're very personable, you're lovely, you're social, like you're going to score great on the social skills. But there might be like resume gaps, or like your executive functioning might come into play.
right.
Things that people don't understand, and then they assume mean things. So we're all about teaching the companies what it actually means and what not to misinterpret.
Mhm.
both in the hiring process and then once somebody's employed, because it's not enough to just get a job. You have to keep the job.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say there's an example I might use that just shows how dyslexic, I mean, and most people I feel like are not test takers, but I was, it was the summer going into senior year of college, and I applied for, well, I had an internship in New York City with Swiss Re, a reinsurance company, as a property underwriter, and I wanted to actually take that job. So I proved myself over 4 months that I could do it. And then we actually had to take a test
At the end?
at the end when you applied for the
For the
full-time
full-time
job.
role.
And I knew the HR women, the women I had worked with for so long, they were like, Gabby, just take the test again. I didn't even pass it again. I was my second time. I'm not a test taker. And it just goes to show, like, this little metric, it's not going to fit every person. So
Yeah,
I
I
didn't get
think
that
what we
job, but
find,
I was eligible for it,
and clearly you demonstrated your skill. And I feel like when I moved from the education realm into the employment realm, it's the same thing. It's the idea that people don't understand how this is manifesting, how this is showing up. And so they misinterpret it, and then they mislabel it, and then they make
Right.
assumptions.
Right.
And what we need is more organizations and companies who look at talent differently, right? And if you're not a test taker, you're not a test taker. Okay, fine. But
Right.
that shouldn't be the litmus test for whether or not you get the offer.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we teach.
Well, and I love that. I love all this. I love this idea that when it comes to education in the workforce and having these conversations, it begins with screening, which is not something I fully appreciated or thought about. I love, and Gab, if you don't mind me sharing just to the story you just shared about, you did the internship, but then you couldn't pass this test. And am I right too that when you were in kind of more private wealth management, you were making the deal? You were literally, you could sell, you had the relationship, but
Yeah.
when it came to that credentialing piece, which probably was a tiny piece of the actual skills needed, that's where you struggled. And you're like, I'm not going to deal with this. I can't get through this, paper pencil test.
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in my second role within John Hancock for 5 years, I was assisting people like you and me, participants who needed assistance on their retirement plan. So educating them on their options. And I was not licensed to give mutual fund advice, but I was advising or educating people on what the best steps were. So I was actually doing all the work. I was making the sale, and then I would actually have to hand it off to my colleagues, who always would fight for my call because they knew I already closed the deal. And my boss knew this. So you actually had to obtain your license within the first 6 months. I was there for 5 years. I tried 4 times. They even paid for a tutorial teacher. They knew how valuable I was, but they just knew I wasn't a test taker. And it was always, you needed a 70. I got like a 67, a 68. I knew what I was doing. I just had so much anxiety during the test taking process. But I mean, you learn from it, and I love that role. I probably would have still enjoyed, climbing that ladder, but I went on a different avenue. So
You went on
yeah.
a different avenue, but what a loss to them. I mean, this is the point. This is what we come in and we
Right.
educate them. Like the metrics that you're using, the metrics to get into the engineering school, the metrics to get into whatever the major is you want. This one happens to be the metrics to, carry on with the insurance. They need to
Yeah.
be taught what we
Yeah.
all what we all already know.
Yeah. I mean, it's the SEC. So it's like, it's to sell investments, but still, I mean, it's true. It's, we're all put into, this, I don't know, certification.
One
that we have to pass.
evaluation.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
ridiculous. That doesn't, and I think you're such picture proof of a Gabby in that it doesn't actually apply. Whether or not I can do this in 60 minutes or less, or time and a half and less, is not a reflection of whether or not I can actually accomplish the position.
Right.
There's
Right.
actually, I've been in contact. There's a gentleman in the North Shore area who's a firefighter and is incredibly accomplished, and has been, in order to kind of rise in the ranks, you have to pass tests, right? And despite, his clear success and all his credential, he can't pass these tests, having, as we all know, nothing to do with aptitude and everything to do with just kind of that, test anxiety in the situation. And it's ridiculous. And we're all losing because of it.
Yeah.
In the chat right now, I'm getting lots of questions that I'd love both of you to comment on around the idea of, so we know specifically for individuals with dyslexia, sometimes processing speed looks differently, right? Sometimes, again, like we were just speaking of, sometimes in more traditional measures, we need extra time and things of that nature. Curious from both of you, what are some either Gabby that you personally experience or that could be available to you, and Judy, what you may educate corporations about? What are the kind of workplace accommodations? What does that look like? And I would also add, Gabby, interesting for you, are the kind of accommodations you need in traditional academic K through 12 college setting, do those apply, or do you need them in the same way like you do in your professional setting? And either of you can start.
I mean, I feel like Landmark gave me all the tools that I just kept continuing to apply. I think because I went to Landmark for 8 years that I wanted to like prove that I didn't need support anymore. And I went to Stonehill and it was like cold turkey for me. I literally got a letter that just said, I need extra time. I have a diagnosis, and that was it. And in the workplace, I think there are accommodations that people do advocate for in my employee resource group that I'm part of. They have mentioned a few things, but I mean, besides like the actual test taking, needing extra time, applying through like the FINRA, all those exams that I had to take, not within like the workforce. So I'm curious to hear what Judy has to say.
Yeah. And I would like, Josh, repeat the question because I kind of heard it a different way.
Sure. So it's kind of a collection of questions, if you will. But it seems to be this idea of, okay, I or someone I love is neurodiverse. And I know that in the particular setting, maybe in a school setting, they need extra time, or
Yes.
there are things that they need in order to show all that they can do. What does it look like in the workplace?
Yeah. And it's so funny because the extra time one is always the one that, candidates will be like, how do I get extra time in my job? And you're like,
Yeah.
doesn't really work that way, right? So obviously we have the IDEA and you transition to the ADA, right? So you're entitled to access to your job and accommodations. But what that looks like in the workplace is, it's this boulder that we're pushing up the mountain. It is companies who, and it comes back to what Gabby was saying, like education, like they either understand, neurodivergence, where, for example, something like extended time or extra time does not mean you're not capable of the job. And it doesn't really translate right into like, oh, I get extended time to do my work. It's de-escalating the anxiety. It's providing enough support so that as you're learning, you're not masking and pretending you don't have these challenges. You're just out with it. So, there's this part of like applying for jobs, and there's every application is going to say, do you have a disability? Yes or no? And you have to check that box. And when we work with students, we're like, oh, no, don't check that box, and then go and ask for the accommodations you might need in the interview, because most companies that are inclusive, they're going to be like, oh yeah, sure, we'll provide these in the interview. Then once you get hired, if you get hired, you can go into asking for accommodations. You're like, how do you translate extra time, for example? You've been in this education realm, you're like, I need extra time, I need a separate setting, I need whatever you need, assistive technology. This is where you have to be the educator. Because so what UConn's doing is going in and training, especially HR departments, what is dyslexia, what is ADHD, what is autism, and how might they need to be supported in ways that you're like, oh, you don't get that, that's a privilege. No, that's a right. Like, I need that thing. And in the workforce, extra time looks like a really supportive manager who says, oh, okay, let me help you break this down, or let me help you get where you need to go, or a colleague or a teammate. So really, if nobody understands neurodivergence, you're not going to get that. If they do, so for example, we did a promotional event last night. So the signature partner of our center is, of all things, it's a bank. Well, you know, Gabby, you're at an insurance company, but Wells Fargo Bank. And they have this phenomenal neurodiversity program. And we had 4 program participants who were speaking last night at this promotional event, and everybody, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. They talked about how I can just ask for help. Like, there's been no other job, first of all, no other interview where I have been so just gotten in the interview process, where I wasn't doing a social like examination or evaluation. I was like understood for my differences. And then once I'm hired, I'm in an environment where, hey, do you need any help? Hey, it's okay. It's okay. Like, lots of reassurance, the way we are at Landmark, right? We, as if I'm at Landmark, but
Come on,
like,
come on.
part of this
You're
village,
hired.
right? Part of this village. So it's converting that kind of Landmark mentality into companies. And they're really, really receptive to it. They want the talent. They want those skills. They want to understand more. There's DE&I initiatives. There's a ton of senior executives whose children or nephews or grandchildren are impacted by this. And they're like, hey, we have to get our workforce, we have to get our workplace ready for these people. We need to not exclude, but include. So what do we need to do?
Right.
I don't know if that answers the question about accommodation, like how do you translate it? But
No, I think that's super helpful. I think that translation is a great way of putting it, right? Because yeah, it's not like school where we're going to go in and we're going to have our work IEPs, right? And it's going to
yeah.
through, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and I would add too. So you know, I'm dyslexic, and for the record, I think if you're worried about this, you should just be dyslexic and run a school for people with dyslexia, because it turns out super accommodating. You know, you could it works out well. But I personally find, and Gabby, I especially don't know if you find this, but I didn't find myself attracted to work that accentuated the things that I struggled with. You know, I was like, I'm not going to be an accountant because it's just not something I feel comfortable with. And
But you're talking to an insurance person. Like, she went into insurance.
well, I also find too that I personally, this is just me, and Gabby, I don't know if you find this way, or if Judy, if you observed it, when I am invested and confident in something, I'm able to work through it in a way that's different when either I feel like it's arbitrary, which is I felt what most of school was, and or it's just peaking at all my anxiety. I don't have self-confidence in it, and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Like every spreadsheet I have to do, I make someone check 15 times. But
Yeah.
you know, in other areas, I'm like, oh, I can handle this, you know, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was in a strategy role that I think challenged me the most, and I felt so uncomfortable the whole time. But I wanted to be able to say I did it. And then after like maybe, I don't know, 2 years, I was like, all right, this is just not the job for me. Like I did fine, but I just never felt like I was really gonna uh be able to add the value that I wanted, because I felt like I was almost at a barrier with myself. Like it just wasn't highlighting the things that I'm good at. So yeah, it's, you know, it's a
Josh, do
learning.
you mind if I ask Gabby to go back to that question of how did you decide to apply for the jobs that you applied to out of
I
town?
know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I
Thank you.
know. It's so interesting.
I mean, even if it's
Um,
haphazard, we would love to hear the story.
I mean, reinsurance was the first job. Boston Mutual long life insurance was the second job. And
But I
then
mean,
I
as an
started,
international business major.
I know.
No,
I
no,
don't
no.
know.
You can say I know, and we all know. Like, look, I'm 100 years old. I get it. I have 4 children who've gone into the workforce. 2 of them are neurodivergent. But what I want to understand, and for the parents who are on the call, is,
Yeah.
um, you know,
Well,
did you have particular
yeah.
skills that the applicant
No.
said, or are you just
I
like, I'm just going for it?
no, I think actually, so the reinsurance company was like a externship program through Stonehill that we went to New York City for a week during that March break, and we visited like Thomson Reuters, like all these very corporate companies that we got to sit down. There was maybe 9 of us students, and it was through like the career center. And Swiss Re was one of the companies that I applied to be an intern for and got the job. So then that experience, I feel like kind of shifted
Yeah.
me. And then I got another internship in life
Yeah.
insurance. And then at Stonehill, I actually got a conversation with a recruiter at the job fair at Stonehill, like in the cafeteria, like the job fairs. And I just went up to the guy and I said, I have a lot of insurance. Do you have and he goes, actually, I got one in long-term care. And I was like, all right, it's a good
Right.
company. It's huge. I'll grow. And then 12 and a half, almost 13 years later, I'm here. So
That's how all of our lives are. But I think sometimes parents who have kids with learning differences, they're really worried about,
yeah,
first of all, will they get into college and will they be able to like persist in college? But then after that, if you're even in that mentality, if you have kids in college, you think about, it's hard enough for anybody to kind of fall into something and just like, okay,
yeah,
just start, you'll figure
yeah,
it out. But when you're, have a learning disability, it's an extra worry. So I really love that story. And it sounds to me like, I don't know, Stonehill College is a particularly small personal environment, which is wonderful. And also that externship, like that made all the difference.
yeah. And I will just tell any student who's on the call who may be in this journey, or a parent that can teach their kids, like just tell them to advocate for themselves. And I know they don't listen to their parents, but that's really what it came down to. Like I built such a good relationship with the career office at my college. And then that's kind of how I was one of those 9 kids that was picked. So yeah, I mean, and that's just like, I think that's why I just keep going into all these different career paths, because I talked to someone else. I'm like, that sounds interesting. They're like, yeah, I think you'd be a great fit.
I think the
I
talkative
don't think,
kids are going to do fine.
I don't know if I've ever, like, I don't know when the last time I've actually applied for a job was. Like, obviously I have an updated resume, but it's always been talking to the right person and kind of, networking.
And I think, as you say that, I think it's so powerful, and I think it's a powerful thing for all of us to hear and for parents to hear. Networking, right? Your ability to get out and have conversations, and and not everybody, especially the neurodiverse world, has that strength. But it's about finding the strength. Like, this is the thing I am good at, and let me leverage this in a way that might allow me to bypass some things that are difficult for me.
Right.
And Judy, I also want to go back to what you said, because I think it's so important. Because as parents, we overanalyze everything about our kids, right? And we, obsess. And I'm also the parent of two dyslexic kids, so we really do it. And you make such a great point. This, Gabby's story is remarkable, and it has everything to do with the fact that she's dyslexic and nothing to do with the fact that she's dyslexic, right? I remember when I first graduated from college, my mom said, I don't care if you're happy, I care if you have health insurance.
Yeah.
That's all I
Can you
want.
pay your rent?
Yes, find a job, and then you'll figure it. And that's what happened. Like, I also, we go through, and again, that's almost a universal experience of being young and figuring things out. And certainly the LD could complicate it, but oftentimes I think it just amplifies our worry than it really informs it. Gabby, real quick, because a couple of people have asked this.
Okay.
Did you take a foreign language in college? As an international business major,
Oh my gosh.
did you take a foreign language in
Well, it's a
college?
big one for dyslexics. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's not required. I think that is something you can get waived, but I did try, because I was brought up as an Italian and I was always, speaking Italian, but I did awesome the first 3 weeks. And then it was such a struggle. I ended up changing it to a pass fail. And I don't think I did it a second semester because it was just too difficult. I think it's great to learn a second language, but not in a college atmosphere. It is so different than submerging yourself. Like, if you study abroad and you do something like that, that's probably the opportunity to do it. But yeah, it's just a whole different beast when you're in that type of intense setting.
And I will just add to this, and Judy, you being in higher ed would probably know even better, but it's interesting, whereas in most, especially public K through 12 setting, especially in a high school setting, that foreign language, regardless of your learning difference, is a difficult requirement to bypass. When you get to college, suddenly, again, it depends on certain circumstances, but as Gabby experienced, and as is often the case, you can get a waiver because of, not always, but often because of your learning difference, and make it up maybe some cultural courses or things of that nature. But it's interesting to me that the place that's supposed to prepare you for college is the place that you have, it's actually not preparing you for the realities. But that's a whole nother
Well,
conversation.
no, I think that's really important. And I think as parents are thinking about different colleges, especially if the learning difference is factoring in, there are plenty of colleges who will offer that waiver, right? They understand this. There's like a spectrum of colleges who are more sophisticated than not on understanding different kinds of learning styles. So it's kind of a nice data point to use when you're thinking about different colleges. I mean, foreign language is a beast for LD. I mean, it's a beast. If you don't, either they waive it or they have alternative, courses you can take to fulfill it. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing for parents to look into as almost like an indicator of the level of understanding. We had a session today with our university council, which is all the colleges and universities that we lead. And we're talking about whether or not you disclose your disability, which I don't even like using that word on the application. And people were just talking about like, you know what? In some ways it's a litmus test. Ask for what you need and see how the company responds. And if they're kind of hardcore about it, that's probably not the environment you want to be in, the culture.
Right.
Yeah. So similarly with college.
That's a really good point. Yep, very good point. If as you walk in the door you don't feel welcome, it's probably a good indication.
Fight every fight. Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah. We're going through the same thing at work right now, and that's how I feel. I'm like, I'll tell my story any day, but I don't want to check that box. Like, I'll tell you. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that box is annoying.
I know. Damn box. We only have 5 minutes left, which is crazy.
We have a lot of questions in the Q&A.
Yes. So one of these, and again, still lots of questions around accommodations, how we might advocate for those accommodations in the workplace, and then and that broad, and then specific for maybe a moment, and then we can broaden out. Judy, I think I'd be interested in your take on this because it's specific to I'm dyslexic or I discover later in my adulthood that, oh, there's a reason I have these certain characteristics. Do I need to go get a formal diagnosis tested in order for my employer to recognize my dyslexia, or, at 35 years old and a lifetime of these characteristics, is that good?
Just ask. Yeah. So the way that we're doing employer education is to get employers to understand that these are differences that you don't need to disclose. You don't need to, like, these are accommodations in the informal sense, where a good manager, a good work environment, you're going to be able to say what you need and people are going to deliver that. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. And so, yes, in order to get an accommodation that is really outside the typical, realm of whatever's being provided to other team members, you do need to have that diagnosis, and you need to formally disclose to HR. That's what we're working at UConn to change. Really, really hard. And companies are super receptive to this. We talk about how, if you need something that's pretty extreme, like you have to work remotely 100% because of a particular disability, and actually there's an in-office requirement, well, you're going to need a diagnosis. But when you're talking about things like, I need somebody to coach or mentor me. I need somebody, or I need I need understanding about the fact that I'm going to forget things. So last night we were talking with some program participants, one who had a traumatic brain injury, and was like, I forget things. I forget things I already know. And I'm a programmer, and I get to the end and I'm like, I don't remember the steps. I call my colleague. They're like, don't you worry about it. Here they are. Oh, that's right. That's what those are. Like, that's a cognitive impairment, right? That, if you're in the right environment, nobody needed to go to HR. There's no formal freaking economy. Just, that's human goodness, right? So we're really trying to teach that, and people are very receptive to it. But you do need one if you're in an environment that's test the environment. If the environment's going to be really rigid, it's not always the best spot for a creative learning difference person.
And Judy, kind of on that too, to your point that some of these are just things that really would be offered to anyone in any circumstance. A quick example, I interviewed someone who said in education there's this idea of multiple intelligences, right? That there's things that we all, and he said if there's multiple intelligences, there's multiple stupidities. And so there's a spectrum of things that we're all bad at that has nothing to do necessarily with an LD diagnosis. Are those most common accommodations things like text to speech, speech to text?
Oh,
What are those common
know
things?
this, Josh, there's no menu. It's whatever the person needs, right? So there's this like weird delineation between, and unfortunately, the majority of companies, they won't be there when UConn's finished, but the majority of companies are still in that sort of like old-fashioned realm of like, if you need something, you have to go through this formal process. And that's what we're really teaching, like job seekers who have learning differences, how to educate their own employers. And people are pretty receptive to saying, oh, you don't, that's fine. You don't need that. But like what people need is understanding, lack of misinterpretation where behavior is misinterpreted. My failure to execute on the task was about my heightened anxiety and or executive functioning skills, and not that I'm lazy, negligent, or I don't really care about this job. Right. So, there's no formal accommodation for that. Right. This is about educating employers. And so I really feel like our curriculum that's it's empathic, it's emotional. It really brings people into the lived experience of someone who's been through this, like, oh, I'm so tired of people misunderstanding me. And employers have been incredibly receptive to that in changing how they practice their response to people. Whether they're changing how they hire, okay, great, that's inclusive. But then once people are there, if I'm not delivering, if I'm not responsive to these emails, I'm not actually getting back to you, I'm not the worst employee ever. I'm struggling. And so how do you dip in? And we give them those strategies for how do you sort of scaffold that employee, just like in education, like bring them along. They might need a longer runway. They're going to get there. You just have to give that longer runway and you have to provide that support. So we kind of want to get away from that, like, stick of like, or what is it? Compliance mentality of like, oh, well, what to be compliant, we have to do this. And more to that human understanding of talent and diverse talent, and how people are going to present and what they're going to need in order to show their best selves. And God, it's so hopeful out there. I know that might be something that parents want to hear. And UConn needs all the support we can get to get this education out to as many companies. And I'm going to come for you, Gabby, and talk to John Hancock.
Please.
Yeah. So thank you.
Even as you're talking, Judy, it makes me think too for our parents and that idea of like, I want my accommodations list or anything that, and that when you said compliance, I think so much of that for many parents comes from the experience of fighting. I need the list and I need it documented, and you're gonna, and that just is such a unfortunate but a familiar narrative for so many people that it's interesting. This is certainly not always the case by any means, but that there might be an opportunity that all the fighting that we're doing to try to prepare our kids to be able to be successful in the workforce, the fight may not even be as hard up there as it is right now.
It's very true. It's very true.
It's inspiring and depressing all at the same time.
I know, we're all exhausted.
I know. We're running low on time, but Gabby, there's been a number of comments about you. You're so successful. You've done all this. You seem so self-assured, which is amazing. Do you have any? Is there a secret sauce? Right? If you looking back on what you've done and the lessons you've learned, is it self-awareness? Is it self-acceptance? What?
Yeah, I like those two. I mean, I think it's kind of what I preached about the networking and the relationship building, and as introverted as you may be, try and put yourself out there. I mean, I think the pandemic really hurt us, and I kind of find myself like not speaking up as much, but then you get a little bit older and wiser, and you're kind of like, I'm just going to tell them how I feel, and that's just kind of it's what you have to do, is just try and get to know as many people as you can and learn what they do and ask the questions to try and understand what what makes you the most interested? I think if I did it differently, I would maybe have, I'm in financial services, maybe found like a product that maybe excites me a little bit more, and maybe that's my next step. But yeah, I don't know if there's a secret sauce. Just be true to yourself. Yeah, be true to yourself, because I think that maybe wasn't what I was doing at the beginning. Like I was trying to kind of prove that I was this numbers girl and wanted to be like in the stock market, and I don't know. I was, it's just not the avenue I went, but at least I work for a global company still.
And I think that's powerful to hear too. I went this way and I was able to learn that really where
Yeah,
I should
yeah,
be and where I maybe want to be is over here.
yeah.
Uh, 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 Again, we're running low on time. There's a gentleman named Robert who's been on our chat offering all kinds of wonderful things throughout. So thank you, Robert. But one of the things Robert talked about was that when he entered the military, looks like many years ago, right? There was not a lot of conversation or help or really acknowledgement around LD, and now that has changed. And Robert, I want to highlight one of the things that I think is fascinating. I'm involved with this group called Made by Dyslexia. And one of the things that they do a lot of work with is GCHQ, I believe I'm saying that correctly, which is kind of the British equivalent of the NSA. So the British equivalent of the National Security Agency. So almost like a CIA of Great Britain. But they actively and purposely recruit individuals who are neurodiverse. It is part of their strategy at one of the world's most powerful organizations, which I think is really amazing. Okay, we're running towards the end of our time. Judy, as at the center, if I've listened, I want to know more. I want to know more about what I can do to maybe help my child. I want to know maybe what I can do in my own work environment. Where do I go to the center website? What do I do to kind of go from here?
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking that. Yes, so we have employer education. So if you have a company, if you work for a company, if you own a company, and you want to get this sort of employer education into your organization, that's one. We have, if you have a neurodivergent job seeker in your life, right? We have a candidate network that connects the actual people looking for internships, people looking for jobs with the companies that are doing this work, so that you are entering the door where people get it. There are companies out there doing this. We need more advocates for what UConn is doing. So anybody who's a parent who wants to get involved, come to, we subscribe to our list. We'll talk to you. We'll do whatever it is. We have events, we have promotions. It's really about getting the word out there so that companies understand. Well, so first of all, we have companies lining up for this. It's crazy. Now, whether or not and who and where within the organization is going to pay for the nominal fee. It is ridiculous how little we charge, because we're not a for-profit company, to get this education in there. But if it's a senior executive who has a grandson who has dyslexia, you can believe the budget's there. If it's somebody in learning development, the budget's going to be there. But it's somebody somewhere else in the company. Sometimes there isn't budget. So we have to find sponsors that make sure that that company gets that training and education, so that they start to shift the way they think about talent and hire and employ people. So yeah, go to our website. I'm happy to drop that in the chat right here.
And we'll also make sure that we email it to everybody that registered too as part of the follow-up.
Awesome.
For sure.
Oh, I love it.
This has been so great. Gabby, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you.
Of course.
And I don't want to underestimate what it means to people to hear, I was there and now I'm here. And just being able to follow and hear that trajectory, I think is just so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And Judy, thank you for being a champion of this. I mean,
Thank you, Judy.
everything you just described, what you're doing,
gosh.
going out there, it's so important. And also anyone on the with us right now, another plug I will give is if you're dyslexic, right? If you yourself are dyslexic, it doesn't even have to be official, right? If you have a dyslexic child, chances are it came from somewhere, right? On LinkedIn right now, you can go in and under your attributes and skills, you can put dyslexic thinking as a positive.
Strength. Yeah.
It's
Love that.
amazing. And if we don't do that, then corporations and the larger community is going to continue to cycle through its misconceptions. So for those of us that can share our story, share our struggles, and share our strengths, I think that is incredibly powerful as well.
I want to just do a quick plug. We have a lot of corporate partners, and one of them is Synchrony Bank. And Synchrony Bank's individual that partners the closest with the Yukon Center is dyslexic. He's made a documentary. He has really just elevated the understanding of dyslexia within Synchrony Bank. They're starting a whole hiring program, an
Wow.
internship program. So this can happen, you know,
Yeah.
it can happen. There's plenty of us out there. So I just appreciate the opportunity, and Gabby, so nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you, Judy, for all you do.
Thank you all for being with us. Have a great night. More to come from Landmark Learns. Later in the semester, we're going to talk about social emotional well-being. So again, thanks to everybody. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Gabby. And have a wonderful evening.